Welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal. It is the 28th day of March, Tuesday, 2023. So glad to be with you. And we're going to talk Stephen Donziger, an environmental lawyer. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court and Trump judges. And we're going to talk also about unions, labor. I was hoping to have my good friend BA on to talk about climate justice and the Biden administration, but he's going to come on Thursday. So we'll have a great guest, BA, on, and there's a video that he has shared on Twitter. I was going to play it for you guys, and I'm not going to not play it because BA is going to be on Thursday, but I will play it Thursday. The reason I'm not playing it today and Thursday, I think it's a great video, is because I'm struggling a little bit to get the video just right, and I don't feel like stopping the program when I've got to get it on and fumbling around. This is Halitics Live. And when I'm live, you can call in. You can see that little oval there, and I think it's the bottom right of your screen. I'm just refreshing the screen so you can see it a little bit better. And the call-in number will work during the program. It will not work when I'm not live. So you got to look around 11 or so Monday through Thursday to join me. And you will get a conference call. Okay, so you'll be put into a conference call, which I will join, and then we'll be on. We also can get our guests on if we have a video guest like BA on Thursday, like Arlen this past Friday. So I want to talk about Stephen Donziger. You may have heard about Stephen Donziger. Stephen Donziger, as I mentioned before, is an attorney. He has been very involved in environmental lawsuits and represented the indigenous peoples of the Ecuadorian Amazonia. About 20 years or so ago, there was a spike in cancer deaths in the eastern Amazon in western Ecuador. This happened because Chevron had been drilling. Actually, it was formerly the Texaco Corporation, which merged with Chevron. You have Chevron Texaco. So when it was just Texaco, they did a lot of drilling in the Amazon. They pulled all this oily sludge or sludgy oil out of the rainforest. They did not care to protect the forest whatsoever. They didn't care about runoff. They polluted big swaths of that rainforest. And surprise, surprise, native Ecuadorians, native Amazonians died. And their land and their sea, their waterways were befouled. The nation of Ecuador was appalled, and they entertained a lawsuit that was brought by Stephen Donziger on behalf of the folks there who were under attack. And in the end, he won a $9.5 billion verdict. Doesn't really sound, actually, it's 18 billion, and the court in Ecuador reduced it to 9.5. Doesn't sound like a particularly excessive verdict when you think about what Texaco, now Chevron, did. He could not get Donziger could not get the case brought in the United States. He tried. I've spoken to Stephen. He tried to bring in the United States, could not do so. The American courts refused to entertain it because, I guess, of fear of annoying, upsetting, angering Chevron Texaco. So it was brought in Ecuador. The reason that Donziger preferred, by the way, the United States was because Chevron has so many assets there, and he thought it would be easier to collect. And he was right. Chevron threw up every roadblock, and ultimately even saw that Donziger was sued. He himself was charged with contempt, with violating all sorts of norms, with bribing jurors. There was no evidence to support this, but ultimately he was. It was entertained in a federal court by a Federalist judge, Kaplan. I think it was Stephen Kaplan or Stanley Kaplan. Stephen Kaplan. Stanley Kaplan, of course, does tests. And this was in the Southern District of New York City. Kaplan ultimately recused himself, but after ruling time after time in favor of Chevron and against Donziger, ultimately Donziger was prosecuted by a different court for contempt, where there was a judge, Loretta Preska. Preska, like Kaplan, who had been handpicked, by the way, by Kaplan to take the case when Kaplan recused himself. Preska, also a member of the Federalist Society, and ultimately referred the matter of Donziger's contempt to the United States Justice Department. The Justice Department said, we're not going to do it. We're not going to hear that challenge. We're not going to prosecute Donziger. We don't believe Donziger did anything wrong. We think you, Preska, may have overreached in your orders against him. Your orders to produce his laptop and your orders to produce all of his materials. We think you, Preska, may be at fault. But regardless, we're not going to worry about that, and we're not going to prosecute Donziger. And Donziger would then be free to continue to try to pursue damages of $9.5 billion against Chevron. So Preska, not taking that defeat lightly, appointed a private law firm that, by the way, had as its client Chevron Texaco to prosecute Donziger. Now you say, how can they do that? How can a private law firm prosecute an individual for contempt of court? That's a criminal charge. We don't allow private individuals, private firms, private attorneys to prosecute. At least I didn't think we did. But in this case, for whatever reason, Preska was angry that she couldn't get the Supreme Court she couldn't get the U.S. Justice Department to prosecute Donziger for contempt. The Justice Department said no. So Preska said, fine, I'll have a private attorney do it. There is a statute in New York that allows, under certain circumstances, for judges to appoint private attorneys to handle certain matters for the court at the behest of the court. This is not that type of case. At least no one ever thought it was. And you'll see what Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch said about that. This case is really interesting in a lot of ways. What you see is true fascism. What you see is the merging of corporate and government interests, a certain kind of government interest. The government interest in prosecuting an attorney who stood up to a for-profit, multinational, billion-dollar corporation. That is Chevron. And as a result, Stephen Donziger, by virtue of the decision of federal court judge Loretta Preska, was in fact sentenced. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison after spending 787 days under house arrest. And this all happened in the past few years. 1921 was when the house arrest began. Donziger spent 2+ years under house arrest. Couldn't leave his house. He had like an ankle bracelet. This is a man who's so dangerous. He carries, he wears a pocket protector. It's absurd. There he is. This is the man who needed to be kept in his apartment, a small 2-bedroom on Broadway, because he raised the ire of Chevron Texaco and federal court judge Loretta Preska. So what did Loretta Preska exactly do? She sentenced him, as we just said, 6 months after she had already kept him under house arrest. It's absolutely, I mean, it's terrifying. This is true fascism. I don't know what else you can call it. I don't know what other possible term would be appropriate. That is what this is. And as Chris Hedges said, the corporate state came for human rights lawyer Stephen Donziger. He goes on human rights. I say environmental. Either way, he was vindicating the rights of Amazonians. And the corporate state came for him. This is published back on October 13th. And he was ultimately sentenced for another 6 months in jail after spending 787 days under house arrest. It's terrifying. It really, it's if you challenge corporate power in America, you could go to jail. And you wouldn't even have the protection, the check, right? Because there's checks and balances. So the check on the judicial power, the power of the judiciary, is that only a federal prosecutor or a state prosecutor, an empowered prosecutor, is the only one who can bring charges against you that will lead you to be incarcerated. Now, a court can step you back, but then they ultimately have to refer it, right? If you start yelling at a judge, you insult a judge can step you back, but ultimately you have to have the keys to the courthouse. In other words, you have to be, I'm sorry, they cooling off period. They can't keep you indefinitely the way Preska kept. At least you'd think they can. That's not what happened here. Preska, kept Donziger for all that time in jail. So now he's out. He's finally out. And he challenged the case in the Supreme Court. And this is what the court determined. The court said, sorry. I mean, it's an amazing story. The Supreme Court let Chevron foe Donziger's contempt conviction stand, turning away the appeal, claiming that his prosecution, determining it did not violate his rights. Now, and this was his rights. I mean, think about this, folks. Stephen Donziger, by the way, call me if you want. I can take your call right now, 240-363-7190. Donziger's rights were not violated, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, when private lawyers were appointed by a Federalist judge with ties to Chevron, prosecuted him for his role in a case that led to Chevron having a judgment of $9.5 million assessed against them. That didn't violate Donziger's rights. It was private lawyers appointed by the judge after the Justice Department declined to do so. So a lot of you are probably thinking, well, and by the way, this is hot off the presses. If you look at a 3-minute read, March 27, 2023, the court decision was just rendered. And I'm sure a lot of you are saying to yourself, well, I mean, it's awful. It's horrible what happened, but I mean, this is what happens. This is the result of Trump justices, right? I mean, that's your immediate reaction, right? It's corporate justice for corporations. And, medieval justice, no checks and balances, pre-Constitution, pre-Thomas Paine justice for those who challenge the power of the state and who challenge the power of a multinational billion-dollar company. Well, I guess a lot of you would say, well, this is what happens when people elect Trump, or when Trump seizes power, when the Russians help Trump, right? Even though that's been debunked, that's how we get this kind of travesty. I think is the right word. It's a travesty. I'm sure that's what a lot of folks are thinking. That would have been my initial reaction. But in fact, that's not, we can't, let me say it a different way. We can't blame this on Trump. It was a 7-2 decision, a 7-2 decision to say, nope, we're denying cert. That decision to find Donziger in contempt stands. It was perfectly okay for Judge Preska, Federalist Society corporate Judge Preska, to step back Donziger for 2+ years and then throw another 6 months on top of that. It was fine. No problem. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. You can't blame Trump for that. It was a 7-2 decision. All three Democratic appointees, meaning Elena Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Sonia Sotomayor, all ruled for the Chevron judge, ruled that she was in her rights, that it was appropriate, it was legal, it was constitutional for a private for-profit law firm to prosecute and gain a conviction by the judge. It was not a jury that concluded, by the way, that Donziger was in contempt for violating Preska's orders. Preska decided it. Kaplan and Preska decided it. Now, who were the two justices who said, no, this doesn't fly, doesn't work? They were two Trump justices, right? Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Amy Coney Barrett, the third Trump justice, went with the majority, the 7-2 majority. But think of it this way. Now, I don't know. Look, who knows what would have happened? But if the three Biden and Obama justices, so those are Kagan, Sotomayor from Obama, and now Ketanji Brown Jackson from who was appointed by Biden. If those three democratically appointed justices had gone along with the first two Trump justices, then we'd have had a different result. Then Donziger would have won, and there would be a much better precedent. This is a scary decision, folks. I'm going to get into it. It's a very scary decision. Look, I was very upset. I supported Roe v. Wade. I don't think it should have been reversed. I get the argument for reversing it, however. The theory is that when a legislature, a democratically appointed legislature, passes a law, like a law that bans abortion, if the people who are most impacted by that law have the right, the ability, the opportunity to vote, then you owe the legislature great deference. So a good counterexample of a law that I believe doesn't, laws that did not deserve much deference, are Jim Crow laws, are anti-voting laws, because the people who are most impacted, if it's an anti-voting law, if it's a grandfather clause, if it's some kind of literacy law or something, the people who are impacted by those laws can't vote for people to change the laws. They can't vote for reps to vote against them. If your law says, well, if your grandfather didn't vote, you can't vote. Well, you can't vote for people to say, no, that's BS. We're not going to have a law like that. So the legislature isn't accountable to the people it's hurting. But with abortion, the legislature is accountable, was accountable. Women were the targets, right? Women could not get an abortion in states that have, and cannot get an abortion in states that have anti-abortion laws. But women can vote. Women, in fact, more women vote than men. So if every woman decided that they didn't like that law, presumably they could, in fact, they really could change it. You could simply vote for pro-choice candidates, and the law would be changed. Now, personally, I think there's something bigger at play than simply voting in favor or voting against the right to choose. I think that it is a privacy issue. I think Roe was correctly decided, but I get the argument it wasn't, because it is within the power of those impacted to reverse it by legislation. That's not the case with this decision. This decision is saying that, by the Supreme Court in Donziger, this decision is saying that a judge can appoint a private prosecutor, a for-profit prosecutor with ties to a company, a corporation that hates the defendant, that is bitter and angry and resentful and wants to send a message to that defendant, Stephen Donziger, and anyone else who might have the temerity to challenge a multinational billion-dollar corporation. There's nothing we can do about that. If the judge takes it into her own hands and appoints a private lawyer to prosecute, there's nothing the majority can do. This is a truly fascist decision. And the only anti-fascists on the court are two that Donald Trump appointed, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Now, when you hear that, how does that make you feel? Are you like, gee, maybe Trump derangement syndrome has gone too far? I mean, the best argument, now I think there are two very strong arguments. Well, there are a number of good arguments not to vote for Trump. And I'm not going to vote for Trump. But the two strongest, in my opinion, let me start with the two strongest, and I'll get to you a very good third argument not to support Trump. So the two best arguments I've always thought were he locked up and separated families at the border. I think that's just, it's a crime against humanity. You have children who don't know their parents. You have babies who are taken from their parents. That's just, I just can't. It's infamous. It's soulless. It's just horrible. Is it as bad as W's torture? Probably, maybe. I'm not going to even go there. I can't imagine someone taking my child from me or torturing me. They're both so awful. It's really, really awful. So to me, that's the worst thing Trump did. The second argument that I am very persuaded by, and have been in the past as well, the justices, the Supreme Court. Presidents come and go, but the court is going to be there for a long, long time. And Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were, I think, in their early 50s, or at least Kavanaugh was early 50s, Gorsuch was mid 50s. Were they qualified? Absolutely. In terms of their writing, their intellectual credentials were top notch. But I don't care about that. I care about their policies. I care much more about their policies. So to me, the second very powerful argument against Trump was the Supreme Court. And now I think that argument is weakened. I really do, because this is such an important decision. Now, one of the things that scares me a little bit, or let me put it this way, gives me pause, giving defense to those two justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, as well, would they have ruled the way they did if they were joined by the three Democratic justices? I don't know that. It may be that they wouldn't have. Kavanaugh was very involved in the Justice Department. Federalist Society. Kavanaugh was a big-time Federalist Society guy. So he I'm not sure he would have been willing to hand a victory to uh, an anti-federalist lawsuit, to hand a victory to Donziger. But I mean, the dissent is strong, and I'm going to get to what Gorsuch said. It's very powerful. I think, absent some other evidence, we've got to conclude that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were acting with the courage of their convictions. When Gorsuch said, and Kavanaugh joined him, the Constitution does not tolerate what happened here. Now, it was a 7-2 decision. So the three liberals plus Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are 5. Now, be careful, because it says on that screen there, 2 members of the Supreme Court's 6-3 conservative majority. Yes, 6 Republican appointed justices out of 9. Of the 9, 2 dissented, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Wow, isn't that amazing, isn't it? It's fascism is here, and fascism enabled by your Democratic justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson. All right, let's show a little bit more, because I think the rationale here, the reasoning by Gorsuch is well worth reviewing. And again, well worth reconsidering the Trump, I don't know, the view that Trump is some kind of sui generis president who is worse than anyone else we've seen in recent times or ever. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say this is the worst president ever. I just don't buy it. I don't get that. By the way, the third reason not to vote for Trump, January 6th. I mean, look, the guy did foment. I don't know. Was it a true was it a rebellion? I don't know. It was bad. It was really, really, really awful. He lost the election, and then he didn't accept it, and he tried to get a bunch of people to go in, and who knows what they were trying to do. It was a riot. It was ugly. Has it been overstated? Maybe by Democrats? Yes. Did Democrats handle it very badly? Yes. But it was bad. January 6th was really anti-democratic. There's no sugarcoating it. Here's what Justice Gorsuch said. The Trump justice said about the prosecution brought by the judge against the, whether you want to call him the humanitarian lawyer, as Hedges calls him, Chris Hedges, or the environmental lawyer that I want to call him. Here's what Gorsuch says. However much the district court may have thought Donziger warranted punishment, the prosecution broke a basic constitutional promise essential to our liberty. In this country, judges have no more power to initiate a prosecution of those who come before them than prosecutors have to sit in judgment of those they charge. That is incredibly important, powerful language. I so respect Gorsuch for that. He's saying there's separation of powers, folks. You don't get to be judge, jury, and executioner all at one time. And that's exactly what Loretta Preska did. She prosecuted him, she sat in judgment of him, and she sentenced him. What could be worse? And it was without question this is fascism. It was, people say, oh, Trump's a fascist. This is fascism. And the only 2 Supreme Court justices who said no were 2 of the 3 Trump Supreme Court justices. Now, Gorsuch makes this point at the end, and I think it's really important. that this is a precedent that's very scary. It's very, very terrifying that in the future, appointed, not elected judges with lifetime on the court without any accountability to anybody, or virtually none. Only by impeachment can they be removed. And that's very hard to do. With this court's failure to intervene, I can only hope. So Gorsuch is saying in the future, we can only hope for our freedom's sake that future courts will consider whether Judge Menashe, now this was from the Second Circuit, Judge Menashe said this is wrong. And that was the decision that was Menashe was overruled by the majority, which said in the Second District, Second Circuit of New York, or the U.S. Second Circuit, which I believe is New York, maybe also Pennsylvania and New Jersey, I'm not sure. Anyway, that the Second Circuit said it's okay. The Second Circuit, which is conservative, said it's okay. What Prescott did is okay. She can appoint her own for-profit law firm prosecutor from the Federalist Society. So what Gorsuch is saying is the law now gives judges this incredible power. I can only hope that they won't abuse it. And you know what, folks? What has history told us over and over? People with power abuse it. This is a terrifying decision. It's an awful decision. It's a wrong decision. And I mean, I lay it honestly. Well, I mean, everywhere, right? I mean, the W justices, Alito, Alito, and I guess it's just Alito now from W. The HW justice, and Roberts, right? Alito and Roberts from W both ruled the wrong way. They ruled for fascism. The HW Justice Thomas ruled for fascism. That's 3. And then 3 Democrats ruled for fascism. Coney Barrett, a Trump justice, ruled for fascism. Only 2 Trump justices ruled for the people, ruled for freedom, ruled for balance of powers, ruled for a limitation on the power of a judge to be, judge, jury, and executioner. It's very, very scary. And we've got to bear this in mind when we're looking at who we elect, who we vote for. I don't have a good answer. What I will tell you now is the Democratic Party is not your friend. It's not your ally. Certainly the Republican Party isn't, but neither is the Democratic Party. All right, we're going to talk climate defiance on Thursday with BA. So I'll show you. This is climatedefiance.org. They stood up, and it's really cool what they did. They stood up to the White House environmental czar. We're going to show you that video. You're going to want to see it. Not today. You'll get it Thursday. I'm really psyched to have BA on to discuss it. He's a great environmentalist and really looking forward to that. And I just want to give you their tweet as well. Oh, so there we got it wrong. Let's see if we can get that tweet correct. Here we go. So there's the correct tweet. We turned out in force to White House Climate Advisor Ali Zaid's keynote address, and we shut it down. The president committed ecocide. This cannot stand. This will not stand. And I think they're referring there to the decision to open up the Arctic for more drilling, the Willow Creek. So we'll talk to BA about that Thursday. You're not going to want to miss it. And for some reason, mine is not transitioning. There we go. All right. So now I want to get to the union final story. If you want to join me, by the way, 240-363-7190. And don't forget to click subscribe. I'll just say live. Click like, but click subscribe. You can see the nice little Halitics blue and white. And I use those same colors as are in my oval for subscribe, bottom right of your screen. So that's what you want to do. Let's get to our final story here. And we'll see if we can get, there it is. Big win for unions. Unions have been under attack for decades. Michigan just gave them a big win. I want to say this is true. This is a big win. And this, by the way, is from our, well, are they really our friends? Kind of, sort of don't ever think of 538 as my friend. I guess they're, that's like this wonky site where they do all this analysis of polls to see, who's going to likely win. Here they did a pretty nice story. This is where I learned of it. I want to give them the credit. I try to give you all as much information. Some people post their sources in their descriptions. I haven't been doing that. Maybe I need to do that. I don't know. I don't really feel like it. Unions have been under attack for decades. Michigan just gave them a big win, no question. From Monica Potts, this is from 3 days ago in your 538. Not my favorite, admittedly, not my favorite. And so what happened? What did Michigan do? What happened in Michigan? So they just repealed in the state, the beautiful Great Lakes state of Michigan, a law recently enacted, by the way, a right to, so-called right to work for less, I think is a more accurate way to describe it. Friday, Michigan repealed an 11-year-old law that weakened unions' power in the workplace, known as right to work law. That means that you can't have a workplace that's only union. In other words, if a person doesn't want to join the union, they don't have to, and they still get the benefits of the union, which is collective bargaining. And it's really not fair, right? Because you get the benefits that the union provides, which include, of course, collective bargaining, but also often control over who arbitrates conflicts between labor and management. You get much more transparency over management decisions. You get seniority rights, seniority protections, a lot of really important benefits that unions will provide for workers. And unions are a huge reason we have a middle class in this country. Union negotiations during the Depression and in the aftermath during the FDR administration led to much higher labor prices, much higher wages. And that made our country a better place. Since then, since we've seen the war on labor, war on unions since 1947 with the Taft-Hartley Act, wages have not kept pace with executive salaries. And our country has, especially since the top marginal tax rates dropped during first the Kennedy administration and then precipitously during the Reagan administration, we've seen, a great unraveling. We've seen a great, we've seen wages explode on the top and continue to drop at the bottom. So one relatively positive note is that Michigan repealed that right to work law. And why were they passed in the first place, these right to work laws? Well, 538, which is very woke and very focused on identity politics, which is one of the reasons I really don't like them. They don't talk about economics. They just talk about identity politics, which to my way of thinking is a way to divide poor, struggling, and working people so they won't unite and take on the power elites. But here they're right. It's true. The right to work laws, at least 70, 80 years ago, absolutely played on racism, anti-Semitism, and anti-communist leanings. A lot of labor organizers were Jewish and communist. There also was the fear among many workers that they would have to be in a union with Black people. And that all played into the passage of these so-called right to work or right to work for less laws. So working people were divided by race by them. It's a very fair point. And it gets to where I'm going with this, which is this is what we have to be eternally vigilant about. We have to prevent, and again, I'm just going to show the whole slide. Why I don't need to show myself. We have to stop letting ourselves on the left be divided by race. Now, it tends not to happen so much where we're racist against people of color. But what we have fallen prey to is the view, the belief that white working people are racist. That's why do you think they voted for Trump? They're deplorables, right? Of course, the fact that Trump justices actually voted against fascism kind of maybe puts hopefully a little bit of a dagger in that theory that you have to be a deplorable to vote for Trump. Let's not put ourselves in some sort of self-righteous category and just dismiss people who don't vote the way we do as deplorable, as ugly, as racist, as stupid, as ignorant. And when we do that, what we're doing is we are keeping apart people who need to join together. They're kept apart so that they may be separately fleeced to their earnings. And they are made to hate each other because that hatred actually allows the financial despots. This is what Thomas Watson said 130 years ago, still true today. The financial despots, the industrial elites, keep poor, struggling working people. And he uses the term enslaved. Maybe that's a little too strong. What he meant by that was they're enslaved by debt, that they have to work without the freedom to leave their tenant farming, their subsistence work because of their debt. They can't pay it off. And to a large degree, we're in that same place now, where so many Americans have credit card debt. Half of us have less than $10,000 in savings. We've got to unite, but we can't let I think it is our innate antipathy for those who are different from us keep us from joining to fight for our best interests. And to their credit, the people of Michigan made that decision that they were going to repeal that horrible right to work law. But I just want to make one last point here, and then we're going to cut it off. It's not enough. The repealing right to work is good. More unions with more ability to organize and raise enough money so they can protect the rights of working people in the union is really, really good. That's a really important thing. But it's not enough. Because with the trade deals, the so-called quote free, unquote free deals, management, as soon as in many, not in every case, not when it comes to McDonald's, not when it comes to services that you have to be provided here, but in so many cases, will simply offshore the work, or at least send it out of our nation. So I say offshore, that would mean obviously Asia, the Caribbean, off our shores, Mexico, Canada. Well, Mexico has lower wages than here. Central America has much lower wages than we have. They will send the jobs to those countries rather than maintain them here and pay workers a decent living wage. That's what happens when you have free trade. That's why the power of corporations is limited. That's why, in the end, we've got to do what I have said before. We have got to, and I'll present it again at another point. What we need to do is we need to guarantee everyone a decent life. We need to bring jobs back. We're only going to do that. It will only happen if we say to corporations, if you make it overseas, if you do the service work overseas, if you offshore that job, then you will pay more than you would pay to have American workers do the work. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching Halitics.